All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Brianna Twofoot. I'm the Vice President of Organizing Leadership at Leadership for Educational Equity, and I am super excited to spend the morning talking with all of the awesome people sitting up here. Personally, I'm deeply, deeply inspired by the leadership of literally all of these people, and I've learned so much from them over the years. So we're excited to share lessons learned, wisdom around organizing with everyone in the room. And one other shout out, I am a Delta 04 alum. Any Mississippi folks in the room? No Mississippi love. Lord. I'm gonna ask again like 5 more times throughout the session just in case people wander in. Okay, I'm just going to walk through a couple of quick things. The session you're in is a chorus of voices, and we're going to talk a bit about advocating and organizing for justice and equality in communities. And each of the folks up here has done that in their communities in different ways and with different constituencies. If I had to summarize a belief that guided this session, it is that our collective impact is greater than our individual contributions. I know that's something that I've seen in my organizing experience since I left the classroom, and folks up here today have as well. So we are going to spend a bit of time talking among the groups, hearing from everyone up here. We are also going to save some time for questions and answers at the end, but throughout the session, there is a hashtag you can use to respond to questions. At various points, Rashawn, our moderator here, will give you all things to think on, to react to, etc. So if you have a phone and you know how to use the Twitter, you can use the hashtag #TogetherWeAct. And I started it this morning, so there are a couple of awesome pictures of this empty room if you want to take a look. And then the last thing is I'm going to introduce Rashawn, who's sitting at the end over here. So Rashawn is an awesome thinker who has combined journalism, research, and advocacy to bring insight to education in our country. He's the editor and publisher of Dropout Nation and a columnist for Rare and the American Spectator. So I've had a great time getting to know him over the past few months, and he is going to lead us through our conversation this morning.
All right. Well, good morning. Good morning. Do a teacher's voice. Good morning. Good morning. Well, welcome. And I see folks got their coffee. That's great. You got your minds. That's even better. You have your hearts. That is absolutely awesome. And I got to tell you, thank you for being here this morning. More importantly, thank you for your dedication to building brighter futures for all of our children and for embracing John Taylor Gatto's admonition to all of us that we should nurture the geniuses within our children. One of the ways to do that is by organizing. This morning, these warriors, these champions for transforming lives and communities, they are going to teach you how to take your individual power, your personal power, I would call it your Fannie Lou Hamer power, and build it into a collective power that transforms communities and transforms the lives of children. Also, they will teach you how to take the relationships you have and the relationships that you are building each and every day in the classroom, outside of it, and build it into organizing. And finally, they're going to teach you how to organize for power in various different ways, from parent power to power in Black Lives Matter to student power. Yes, students do matter. We tend to forget that in this business, unfortunately. So today, we have these 4 powerful folks. Now, Milagros, I'm going to make sure I get your name right. Barcellos. Barzillo, my apologies. See, I practiced this multiple times. So. Yeah, my 8th grade Spanish is terrible. She is the founder of Rise Colorado, a parent power group that's doing amazing work in that state. Next will come Zeke Berzoff Cohen, who is the founder of Intersection, a student organizing group, and also one of 2 candidates, actually 3 candidates for public office on the stage this morning. Also, we have Jonathan Mansouri, who works for LEE, Leadership for Educational Equity. He works with your fellow alumni on organizing and transforming communities and working with communities to make that happen. And finally, now, I don't need to introduce this guy. You know who he is. And if you don't know who he is, then you need to go and find out who he is. So, DeRay McKesson, you know who he is, and let me go ahead and move to the first thing that we have to ask. I have to ask all of you right here before we get into all of them presenting. What do you know about organizing? What is organizing to you? Anyone can, anyone can come up and explain it. What do you think organizing means to you?
Organizing is when you get people together to work towards a common goal. Organizing is when you get people together to work towards a common goal, like legislatively or however.
All right, cool. Cool.
It's also a philosophy about the way that power works and the way that power should work, being that you use the community organizing model to flip the power structures upside down so that people in a given community are the ones that are determining their own fate rather than somebody advocating on their behalf.
Yeah, that's a good question. Those are 2 good answers. And when you think about those 2 answers and your own personal answers, also think about a time when you witnessed inequity in your classrooms, in your schools, in your communities. And think about whether you felt powerless to change it and what did it make you want to do. Now, our folks here have seen it, and they've taken action. And Millie, she's going to be the first to tell you about her experience and how she took action. So.
Sure. Hi everyone, my name is Mina Grocer, Millie Barzillo. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of Rise Colorado, as Rashawn was sharing. So my co-founder, Veronica Palmer, and I started Rise Colorado first and foremost because we saw the power of our own families in our education. We were able to obtain the opportunities we did because of sacrifices of members of our own family. So we founded Rise to educate, engage, and empower low-income families and families of color to rise as change agents in our public school system for educational equity. And at the heart of our work, our theory of change, is that when we look at successful social justice movements in the history of this country, we see that there was always landmark policy that was critical to change, and there were always champions for that policy. But transformational systemic change did not happen in any of those movements until those most impacted by a given injustice were empowered to rise up and demand change. So we believe that if we want to close the opportunity gap and achieve educational equity, we have to empower our communities, low-income communities and communities of color most impacted by the opportunity gap, to lead this work. When we think about what's happening right now in education, as a Latina, this work is deeply personal for me. The opportunity gap impacted part of my life. And so at the end of the day, I don't get to go home and shrug my shoulders and say, oh, well, I tried to help those people. These are my people. This is my community. This is the life and death of my community. and of other communities of color. And when we talk about community engagement is like the hottest, sexiest buzzword, especially family engagement and education right now. But I do not think that at the end of the day, our system leaders are actually ready for enlightened, engaged communities. How many people actually want enlightened, engaged communities? The reality is what engaged communities take. It takes for us to not only be willing to share power with people who are impacted by injustice, but we have to be able to take a step back and know when it's not our turn to lead, and know when we have to give up power. So for me, I am a Latina, sure, but I'm educated. I'm not the most impacted by the opportunity gap. Now, our members at RISE lead our work because they are the most impacted. For all of us, we have to think about how are we willing to share and give up power to put our communities at the forefront of this movement.
Now, Zeke, what is your story?
Sure. So I was a teacher in West Baltimore, in Sandtown, Winchester, which has recently become somewhat infamous. It was where Mr. Freddie Gray and his family grew up in the Gilmore housing projects with lead paint, with an economy that revolves largely around liquor stores, bail bondsmen, funeral parlors, and heroin, and not much else. And that was the neighborhood that my students were walking to school in. The school building that I taught in itself was strangely resemblant to a prison in that the walls were, in some places, literally crumbling. You had asbestos still in the building, no running water, no heat, so it would get extremely hot or extremely cold during the winter, and no air conditioning, so it would get extremely cold, extremely hot during the summer. And that's where we're sending kids to school. And what message does that send to them? It sends the message that you are not worthy of a decent education. And so part of that experience for me was in some ways recognizing what Millie was saying, is that our young people who are so impacted by educational inequity and white supremacy and racism need to be at the forefront of this movement for change. And so the quick story I would tell, a couple of years back, we got involved in this effort to pass a 3-cent bottle tax, right? So this was a tax on, bottles, water bottles, liquor, whatever, that would go directly toward a bond to fix Baltimore City's badly outdated school buildings. And like I said, this was personal for me because I taught in a school that was crumbling, and Baltimore has some of the oldest, most ramshackle schools in the state of Maryland and really in the country. And so we had gone, our community, our students, the ACLU, the Industrial Areas Foundation group had all gone to Annapolis to say this is unacceptable. We need to improve and renovate our schools. We need better school buildings for our children. This is our future. If you don't invest now, we're going to have big problems down the road. And the legislators said no. They said Baltimore needs to have some skin in the game before we give you any money. We give you too much money as it is. And so we went back and we proposed a 3-cent bottle tax to go directly towards school facilities. And then we would put it into a bond and be able to renovate our schools, right? The problem with it is that a certain city councilman, Mr. Carl Stokes, who is the head of the Taxation and Finance Committee, was adamantly opposed to the bottle tax. A lot of folks thought that he was being funded in part by the liquor industry, and so he was not into it. And he wasn't going to let it out of his committee. And so we decided to organize. And to the original question, we got together with all of these groups, the Baltimore Education Coalition, the ACLU, BUILD, teachers, parents, and we held a big accountability session. We managed to bring out about 3,000 people together and line up our city council and one by one say to them, will you support the bottle tax? And the first guy, Jim Kraft in the first district, said, yes, I will. And all 3,000 people are cheering and they're going nuts, and it's the best thing since sliced bread, and it's just wonderful. And they go to the second person, Mr. Brandon Scott. Mr. Brandon Scott, will you support the bottle tax? And he says yes, and everybody's cheering, and it's just wonderful. And they go all the way down the line to Mr. Carl Stokes. They say to him, Mr. Carl Stokes, will you support the bottle tax? And he takes the mic away from the organizer and he says, you've been lied to. This is not about our children. This is going to put businesses out of business. This is a regressive tax. It's no good. It's no good for kids. And the organizer takes the mic back and says, Councilman Stokes, that wasn't the question. The question was, will you support the bottle tax and get it out of your committee? And he takes the mic back and he says, your mayor has lied to you. She is manipulating you. This is not about you. And one of my students takes the mic, and she speaks up, and she says, Councilman Stokes, you know, I understand that the city is in a budget crisis, but don't balance the budget on the backs of me and my brothers and sisters. And at that point, Councilman Carl Stokes starts to lose it a little bit and starts to sweat and starts to get really visibly uncomfortable. And this whole crowd that had been cheering and laughing and having a wonderful time starts to boo him. And so all of a sudden, he's nervous and he's shaking, and he takes the mic and he says, well, the mayor's lied to you, and he just starts looking like a deer caught in headlights. And the media is there, the Baltimore Sun is there, the Baltimore Brew is there. This whole scrum of reporters catch this thing. And the next day, we sit down with him, with one of the organizers from Build and one of the organizers from our group, and say to him, Councilman, this is not good for you. You need to just let this thing go. You know, it's starting to look real bad. And he says, okay. And he lets the bottle tax out of his committee, and it passes in front of the city council, and we go back to Annapolis, and we ended up being able to raise $1 billion for Baltimore City public school system. And again, that was because we all organized together with the ACLU and Build and the Intersection and the Baltimore Education Coalition and all these groups speaking together as one unit.
Great. Now, Jonathan, what's your story?
I mean, what I think is interesting is that, you know, as organizers, we're storytellers. And that's because it's very and deeply personal to us. My second year in teaching, I became a science lead on campus. It wasn't that big of a deal. It was a small campus anyways. But the reason why it's important is we got a pretty big grant on campus provided by a local church to get one-on-one laptops for every student. And the principal comes in and says, hey, John, you know, as a science lead, you know, what do you want to do with this money? And I said, you know what, this would be a really great idea, you know, to get one-on-one laptops for every student, but let's you know, build a computer science program. And she said, great, like, why don't you, you know, take a stab at it and teach them how to code? And I'm looking around, I'm like, well, I don't know how to code. And everyone's kind of looking around. So I think what you know, as a teacher, you did teach yourself the night before, and you know, you teach them the next day. But you know, she was thinking about. Thank you. She was thinking about, you know, you can just teach them how to turn on the computer. You can just teach them how to, like, you know, create a PowerPoint, make it really nice. I'm like, you know, this is a really great idea, but there are some schools on the west side that provide every student on their campus, even like a requirement, a coding class. And they must, you know, graduate with coding. I wanted to make sure that every student on my campus had that opportunity as well. So, you know, as the computer science teacher, I still remember the first day of class. Everyone came in. They're super excited. I was that teacher that pumped everything up. And they're coming in saying, Ms. Mansuri, you know Flappy Birds? I'm like, yeah, I know Flappy Birds. We're going to create number 2, and we're going to become rich. I'm like, you know, okay, cool. Just, you know, come and sit down. So they take their seats, and they open up their laptops. And I'm like, all right, guys, we're going to kill it today. You know, you're going to go to Google. You're going to type in Code Academy, and you're going to hit enter. So like, all right. So they type in Code Academy. They hit enter. And the Google homepage isn't loading. I'm sitting there, this is a simple Google homepage. I don't know what's going on. Guys, just hit it again, just hit it again. So they hit enter, and it's barely loading. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, hold on, what's going on here? And now never forget the faces they made, because it was a face that wasn't, frustrated. It wasn't a face of getting angry at the computer. It was like a face that they were complacent with the issue. That there are like consistently issues at their school that, one, they're giving the resources that don't work, their basketball hoop is crooked, right? Nothing ever works on campus, and that angered me. That angered me that this wasn't just one issue that was affecting them, it was consistently an issue on the campus. We found out that, the school wasn't hardwired for high-speed internet, the community around it wasn't wired for high-speed internet, and I think that was it for me. I think there's a ton of issues that affect us as teachers, but once there's an issue that's starting to affect your classroom because they're denied an opportunity just to have, a computer science education, that's where, the digital divide starts, that became personal to me. So I started bringing teachers together, everyone in the classroom. I didn't know what I was doing was called organizing at that time. Someone pulled me and said, hey, John, what you're doing is called organizing, and I want to train you on it. So, through the year, I was organizing a ton of teachers. Ultimately, we wanted to unionize. I was threatened for my job, couldn't do that anymore. But what we decided to shift our energy and shift our skills to do was create a teacher organizing group in Los Angeles to, tackle some of the issues that are affecting our communities. These are not issues that are directly just impacting us, but are directly impacting the community. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more today about what does that look like. But ultimately, throughout that year, we created an initiative with other teachers, partnership with the community, to make sure that we got $1 million for crossing guards at LA schools. But I can talk a little bit more about that in a bit.
And DeRay, what's your story?
So on August 16th, 2014, I was on my couch. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, and I saw tweets about Ferguson, and it was the middle of the night, and I waited till my best friend woke up. He lives in Chicago. I called him, and I was like, Donnie, I think I'm gonna go to St. Louis. It was 7:55, and I just needed to tell somebody because I lived in Minneapolis. I was a senior director of human capital for the school system. I moved there for work, so my friends weren't there, so I felt like I couldn't do a 9-hour drive and not tell anybody I was driving across the country. So I called. Donnie was like, you should go. And by then I had my bag at the door. I'm ready, everything. So he's like, you should go. I walk out, I get in the car, I put on Facebook, I'm heading to St. Louis. I don't know anybody in the state of Missouri, but I hope I know somebody who knows somebody. And 7 hours in, I get a call from a Teach for America staff member that says, DeRay, we found somewhere for you to sleep. So I call this random person, and I'm like, hey, I'm coming in today. I care about the work. And I end up on West Florissant, which was the street in protest in St. Louis that all of you probably saw in some way on TV or the live stream or Twitter. And I became one of many people who joined the fight for the end of police violence in St. Louis. I'm one of many protesters who know that we can live in a better world, and that was the beginning of my story. When I think about the organizing work, though, I think about a couple things. One is central, this idea that we have never been the voiceless, we've always been the unheard, and so much of the work that we have been doing in protest had been about how do we amplify these stories? How do we tell the truth in public and do that as a core principle to what we believe? There's a second thing about what does it mean to be a marginalized person in the work of organizing. As marginalized people, a condition of that is that you live on the margin. And on the margin, you are often unheard and unseen. And in organizing work, people become heard and seen differently. And that, in some ways, is the power of organizing. It also comes with the peril of visibility. Sometimes in this work, people, because they have not been seen and heard for so long, that being seen and heard becomes the work, as opposed to whatever goal or issue they're fighting for. I always tease out this thing about authenticity when we talk about the most impacted communities or any language that veers towards that. I worry, while I believe the message, I worry that we think about our authenticity as our proximity to the trauma. And I think about, I'm the child of 2 drug addicts who recovered, which doesn't make me a better organizer. It doesn't make me somebody who necessarily knows more about addiction or recovery, but it does make me closer to the trauma. And we have to tease that out a little bit better when we think about the organizing work, because I worry that people are well, whoever's closest to the poorest person really knows. And that just isn't, that's a dangerous way to think about authenticity. The authenticity question is an important question, but again, as someone who, I know what it's like to sleep on the floor when they shoot too close to the house, which doesn't make me an expert on crime or safety. There are other things that I do think may be qualified to talk about these issues, but it is not necessarily about proximity to the trauma, so just called it out. And another thing that's been super important to us as we think about the organizing is this idea that there's so many people who want to do good work but don't want to be members. And that has been key to the way that we've digitally organized, that there are people who don't want to come to a meeting every 2 weeks or don't want to whatever, but they want to do the work. So how do we create the infrastructure to allow people to do incredible work that doesn't necessarily rest on a member-based organization? That is not a knock to those, but that is an understanding that in the same way that we talk about there's no monolithic blackness, there's no monolithic organizing, that we have to start to push the boundaries of the way we think about getting people together. And then sort of the last two buckets I'll talk about is this thing about big bets. I'm a person about big bets. I'm obviously running for office, and it is a campaign of big bets. I think about when I went to St. Louis, it was a big bet. I was like, I'm gonna find somebody whose couch I can sleep on, and I don't know anybody in the state, and we can just make this work. I think about I had 800 followers on Twitter, August 2014. I have about 300,000 now, and it was about just telling the truth in public. And when we think about the power of big bets, it is this idea that you need a vision for what the work should be, you need the skills to be able to do it, and the fortitude to see it through. And for us, the big bets has been so key to that. And the last thing, to piggyback off of what Jonathan said, is this thing about storytelling. So much of what we do is the story. I often say that the revolution is built on a well-told story, right? The stories are so much of what we live, what we think about is how we live in the world. And the stories rest in organizing, I would argue, on the questions we ask. So I think about one of the ways that I talk about intergenerational trauma is this thing about generation reader. What generation reader are you? I'm a third generation reader. My great grandmother could sign her name, and that was all. She was really proud of it, and I didn't get that until I was an adult. But I'm a third generation reader. I'm in the third generation of people in my family who can read and comprehend text. And that changes the way that me and my sister approach literacy, and definitely the way that my kids approach literacy. When I think about another question is this idea of safety, where are you most safe when you close your eyes? Almost none of you will say in a room full of the police, right? And it's about helping people reorient the way they think about safety, and that has been key to us. And then the simple question, I think, in organizing is the simple question to ask, hard to answer, is this idea of what does it mean to win? I think so much of this work is passion for us. It is the purpose. We know it's right. We believe it. We feel it. And then you ask people, well, what does it mean to win? And people are all over the place, right? Does it mean that everybody passed the test? Does it mean that more parents simply come to the meeting? Does it mean that the law changes? And without an answer to the question of what does it mean to win, I worry that people get addicted to fighting. And as somebody who has been tear gassed in multiple states and protested in 20 and been at over 300 protests, it is not about, I'm not there to fight, I'm there to fight to win. And the question about what does it mean to win is so important so that we don't fight to fight. So much of this work is about liberating communities and creating access or reparations, however, reparations is such a sticky word, but about acknowledging and repair trauma that's happened. But again, I would leave with the central question of what does it mean to win is at the heart of organizing, especially in marginalized communities.
I mean, everything that everyone said here has raised a lot of questions. And I'm going to actually start with you, Millie. Because I'm going to tell you, one of the things that you mentioned was this whole idea of leaders don't want engaged communities, which I would dare say that's the nicest word for that. But, the question I have to ask, and there are going to be different models for everyone, but what, for you and for your work, what does engaged communities look like? What does parent power, and I hate the word engagement. I'm going to tell you right now, engagement is a public education word that means nothing but parents do what the teachers and school leaders tell them to do. And no, this is not against teachers, and it's not against school leaders, but I'm going to be really honest. Parents have their own intelligence, and they know they have an idea of what they need for their kids. They don't know everything, but they know enough. And if you're just going to tell me engagement, what that means is you want them to participate in a bake sale, and if that's what you want for your parents, I'm going to tell you, don't talk to me. I don't want to hear about your bake sale today, or don't do the kids' homework. Don't talk to me about that. But what does parent power, what does community power looked for you?
So in our work at Rise, we are lucky every day to see examples of families who are fighting for their voices to be heard, for those wins that DeRay was talking about. And so one leader who comes to mind for me when I think about that question is Diana. So Diana came to the U.S. from Mexico when she was in high school, and she enrolled and graduated from Aurora Central High School and Aurora Public Schools, where we work. She had dreams of continuing her education, but wasn't able to due to the realities of her family's circumstances. And she's lived in Aurora since she came to the States. Now she has 2 kids, Miranda, who's 5, she's a preschooler in Aurora Public Schools, and Sebastian, who's 1. I met Diana, because she came to a Parent Opportunity Gap Night workshop run by Rise at Miranda's school, and I went to her house to do a one-on-one with her. She was pleasant, she was warm, she was welcoming. She answered my questions briefly, but she really didn't have a problem with the school system. When I started talking to her, Miranda had been in school 2 months, I think, at that point, and she frankly was just glad to get an ECE seat in a district that only provides 1/3 of kids in the district with ECE. But as we got to talking a little bit more, she shared with me that the real reason that she wanted to meet with me and to get more involved with Rise beyond the workshop we did in the school was because she knew the education that she received at Central hadn't prepared for her for success. And right now, Aurora Central is the largest high school in in the state of Colorado, to be on the watch list to go into state turnaround next year if student achievement doesn't improve, which has never happened in our state. So it's still not making the cut. And she wants different for Miranda and Sebastian. And so Diana got involved with our first organizing campaign of families. We put together our first coalition of ECE families from 2 schools who wanted to come together around an issue of academic achievement. So the way our model works is we don't have policy planks, we don't have preconceived issues. Families pick the problems they see in our school systems, and based on the solutions they want to see, make an issue cut. So our ECE coalition was very concerned about the fact that in our district we only see half-day preschool, 4 days a week, which totals to 11 hours of instruction for their kids. And they weren't getting any resources or homework to support learning at home. And they were feeling like our kids aren't going to be kindergarten ready. All of them had experienced different times asking for resources and not getting them. And so they came together with 3 goals around their campaign. They called it the homework campaign. The first was to get developmentally appropriate resources to support their kids over the summer. This was last school year, to prevent summer slide. The second was to get consistent resources through this school year. And the third was to get a district policy change because they knew their kids are only at these ECE centers for 2 years. They want families who are coming behind them to actually have access to those same resources as well. So Diana actually took the lead at Jamaica Child Development Center, which was one of the 2 schools in the coalition. And she first went to talk to Miranda's teacher about receiving homework. When she wasn't able to get the resources she wanted to support Miranda's learning at home, she recruited other families to go with her to meet with the school leader and talk about the importance of engaging families in their children's education and providing them resources, viewing them as partners, and showing them how to use those resources at home to support student learning when the district isn't providing full-day preschool. And so in that process, she went to the school, had them set up meetings to talk about what those resources are actually going to look like, ran 2 rounds of feedback with the school, two feedback meetings because the resources they were providing were not rigorous enough, and was the first one to win on the homework issue. And so her win inspired the families from the second school, and they also won the homework campaign at their school. And our families actually won at a 3rd school because they were serving on a district committee where the school leader of the 3rd ECE center in our district was working. So the work that Diana did with 4 other families led to the families of 700 ECE students in our district receiving resources for their students because she wanted to see a change not just for Miranda and Sebastian, for all the kids in our district. And she continues to serve as a leader on that committee. The picture up on the screen right now is actually her at a recent press conference we did on a report we put out in a coalition with 16 other organizations on the status of education in our district. and the recommendations that our families are recommending for the district to turn student achievement around. And she's actually here today, speaking in another session. I wish you could all hear her, but you're here with me, about her incredible work. So I think of Deanna, that is what is possible when our communities lead. Like you were saying, our communities know, they have solutions. And that's what, that change is what's possible when we empower them to lead.
That's amazing, amazing. And Zeke, what I have to ask the question because student organizing. I mean, what does that look like? What does it really look like to grab students and mobilize them into action?
Yeah, so in my work, I think a lot about this idea of intersectionality, right, which is hard-baked into the title of our program. And it's the idea, to me, it's the idea that while we all come from different places and may have experienced different traumas, we're all connected by a common humanity, and that our stories and our lives intersect, right? And so as a Jewish person growing up, my grandparents, I lost about a half of my family in the Holocaust. And so that was very hard-baked into my identity growing up. My mom would always tell stories, and we would read Night by Elie Wiesel, and we would sort of, think about what it means to be a Jewish American. As an educator, teaching in Baltimore, and then engaging in student leadership, part of the thing for me was really learning how to listen and understand other people who've had a very different struggle and challenge. And teaching them that for them to be effective, teaching our youth that for them to be effective, they also need to listen and understand different people's struggles. So for me, I think about a couple of years ago, we were thinking about getting involved in the DREAM Act, which simply put was a law to give undocumented kids in Maryland the ability to go to a Maryland State College at an in-state tuition rate. And at this point, our group, the intersection, was all African American. They were all from Baltimore, so they were all native to Baltimore. And initially, my students had some real resistance to getting involved with the DREAM Act. Like other Americans, they'd been fed this idea that those people are coming here to take our jobs, they don't belong here, this is a tax break that they're getting, it's unfair, it's gonna take something away from us. That was kind of the preconception that a lot of our students brought. And what changed the conversation, what changed the dialogue for us is that we sat down with a group of dreamers and we listened to the stories of JJ and Eves and Mariela and these folks that had come from El Salvador and Ecuador and India and all these different places. And what our students at the intersection realized is that these kids are just like us. They've experienced what it is to grow up in poverty. Often they've experienced what it is to live in a single or no parent home. They've had all these challenges that we've had, and yet they have this additional barrier of being undocumented and having to live their lives in the shadows and not being able to go to college because before the DREAM Act, for so many undocumented kids, they were unable to afford tuition. You couldn't get grants, you couldn't get loans, so it was a true barrier. And for our students, I remember there was like this light bulb moment where they saw this commonality, this intersectionality. They saw these dreamers as actually being fully realized human beings with stories of their own. And so we got fired up, we got charged with this thing about, even though this struggle isn't gonna directly impact us because we all were born in the United States, we are still going to be a voice in this movement. We're not gonna be the leading voice, because undocumented folks need to speak for themselves, but we are going to be a voice that advocates alongside our undocumented brothers and sisters. And I remember one of my most sort of challenging young men who had had all sorts of personal issues in his life really took this thing on. And he spoke out on the news, on TV. He knocked on hundreds and hundreds of doors. And, you know, this was the kid that teachers were constantly throwing out of their class, that was having all these issues within his family. This was the kid that no one wanted to deal with. And here he was out there banging on doors, advocating for the DREAM Act. And so the day of the referendum, this was a vote that Maryland did to decide whether we wanted the DREAM Act or not. I was standing at this polling station in Southeast Baltimore, and I'm wearing my intersection shirt, and this older African-American woman comes up to me, and you know, we're handing out stuff, we're passing out flyers for the DREAM Act, and this older African-American woman comes up to me, and she's looking at my shirt, she's looking at the intersection shirt, and she's like, "Don't I know you from somewhere?" And I was like, "I don't know, did you maybe meet one of my students? We're a youth leadership and organizing group. They've been knocking on doors all over the city." And she goes, "Oh, yeah, that young man with the dreads, right? That young man who came to my door." And I was like, "Yeah, that's Antonio. That's my man. He's been doing this work." And she looks at me, and she actually starts to cry. And I'm like, "Oh my God, what did Antonio do this time?" Like, and I'm like, "Ma'am, I'm really sorry. Like, I know he's a little rough around the edges. Like, we're working on it. You know, he's got a good heart and all this other stuff." And she stops me right in the middle of my spiel, and she says, "No, you don't understand." She says, "I grew up in Selma, and my father died thinking that black people in this country would never be able to vote. And yet here there's a black man in the White House and a black boy out here trying to give other people their rights. It's a beautiful country."
Amazing.
And in the end, the DREAM Act passed overwhelmingly with support from Baltimore City. And it was amazing to see our young people play a role in that fight.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, it's amazing. And I gotta tell you, I mean, it is amazing to see when kids, children, young men, young women actually stand up and do things. I mean, it makes me wish at times that I was able to do that when I was younger. Otherwise, I'd be somewhere else. But, you know, speaking of doing something amazing, now, Jonathan, you happen to have been in LA, working with Steve Barr and Green Dot, which that's an amazing story. I actually had spent some time in LA. Actually, when Steve actually started the first 2 or 3 schools. And I'm gonna guess you're talking the work with Lock High and that organizing. I mean, can you tell me about that moment and how that really kind of cemented, maybe shaped your thinking about organizing?
Yeah, so after I started getting angry about, you know, organizing, I wanted to explore what organizing actually meant for myself. So after, you know, a few years, I joined Green Dot Public Schools to become one of their parent organizers, one of the lead organizers. And I love the point that you made about the philosophy of organizing, because what that taught me and the framework that I had when I was organizing there was that if you start believing that communities actually have the answers, I think the way that you perceive organizing fundamentally changes, and the way that you approach it fundamentally changes. So when I joined Green Dot Public Schools, we had this vision. We started asking ourselves a couple questions. One, what would engagement look like? To the conversation we had before, what would parent engagement look like at schools if we started organizing? What would it mean if parents recognized the power that they had in communities? You know, what would it mean if they actually were at the center of it? So over the course of a year, we wanted to play that out. We wanted to play out those questions. We wanted to see, you know, what would this mean if parents were actually trained to become organizers? What would it mean if they were at the front of it? And our vision in the head, and it was a pretty high expectation for ourselves, could we get these parents in front of public officials in about a year? So what we started to do was, it was only about 4 of us as organizers to start with, and we started having a couple hundred one-on-ones with parents. We started identifying parent coordinators at different school sites. We had 25 school sites in South Los Angeles to become the organizing centers at their school sites, and we had hundreds of house meetings over the course of a year. Within that course of a year as well, we created something called a Parent Institute, and at that institute on Saturdays, we trained our parents to become organizers themselves. So we weren't just organizing parents, we were teaching them how to become parents and start organizing their communities. Because we started believing that it wasn't about our self-interest. Our self-interest was to organize. The self-interest of this work was the parents' self-interest. So an issue came in mind, right, because it's not about our issues, it's about our parents' issues, was it started to become cheaper in South Los Angeles for a business to start dumping their trash next door on the sidewalk. It was cheaper to just dump it on the school site, which was next door, than it was to get picked up. This was an issue. This is something that, was directly impacting the school because the students were on cross-country, they're running around the school, they're walking to school, they're walking back home, and they don't have to step over trash. That's not something that you have anywhere else in the city. And a lot of people didn't think that this was an issue because a lot of people didn't see it. Public officials didn't really care about it, it wasn't really talked about, but the parents cared about it. And that was the important part. So fast forward a year, we started organizing 3,000 parents through these house meetings, through these one-on-ones, through having parent coordinators as the central organizers at these school sites, and getting parent leaders on board on it to start organizing their own groups and their own networks. 1 year later, we had an assembly in downtown LA with 2,000 of those parents in front of public officials, the most that you can get with the California Brown Act. So we had city councilors, school boards, local assemblymen, local community leaders, and the parents, not the organizers, the parents went on board on a panel and demanded for the public officials to support the platform. One of them was minimum wage. One of them was to make sure that the streets were getting cleaned up, and the businesses, were getting penalized if they're going to be dumping trash on the school site, which doesn't seem like, that's a big ask. So that's what we did after a year. We made sure that 2,000 parents felt that they are being listened to, because our public officials are never walking in the streets asking for their votes or their money, that those parents are leading the work, not just the organizers, and that they start feeling this drive of, there is now a civic center, there's now a civic sector in South Los Angeles, and the issues that we want to fight for can be resolved with the power that they have.
Great. And now DeRay, I got to ask this question. And I think about this from, as pointing out, the Steve Barr School, which was part of it is, if you're going to go into communities, you have to listen to them. You have to actually be engaged with them and be engaged in their own concerns. The other side of it, as you mentioned, is you don't need to be, and you mentioned this, you don't need to actually be, this idea of being close to if you're poor, then you know more about this and you're more authentic than others. The question I have to ask is, what, for the folks who are coming in, the folks in this audience, when they're coming in, what do they have to do in terms of what does authentic look like? Because I think people overuse that term, and I'm honest when I say it. Authentic, everything becomes inauthentic. What does that authenticity really look like?
So I'm being transparent that is a question that we need to tease out, that so much of organizing, I think, is how do we create space for people? And how do we create space that honors the fact that people know the world they want to live in, people are willing to fight for that world, people know what it means to win, people believe and can imagine a better life, honoring those things, because so many people feel disempowered. I think about when I've seen, I was a senior leader in 2 school districts, and parents, there's a rhythm to the way parents complain, is that parents complain on Monday, the district says something on Tuesday, and nobody's complaining on Thursday, and then the district goes back to what it's doing, right? And there's a way that institutions are designed to outlast people, and organize and create space so that the people can push back and sort of keep the fight going for a long time, and those sorts of things. But when I think about the authenticity question, it's important. Proximity is also important. How close are you willing to stand with the people you say you serve is a real question. I'm challenging this idea that like proximity to trauma is the same thing as standing next to the people, right? Like standing in concert with people.
Yeah.
And what does it mean to like be led by young people? What does it mean to ask people what kind of world do you want to live in, and then use your privilege or your access to like help people get there? Like I think that is what I'm saying. I think about in teaching, it's like, you know, do you sit in rooms and let people say wild things about your kids, right? Like that is a proximity question. It's like how close are you willing to stand to the truth in these moments when the people calling your kids everything but, you know, a child of God in those rooms? Like, are you willing to tell the truth there? Do you know the grocery stores they shop at? Are you in communities? I think about places like Baltimore where there's so many neighborhoods. That is hilarious. There's so many neighborhoods where the only place you can spend money is a corner store. Like the only place you can legally spend money is a corner store. Like the only place. That like blows my mind when I think about it. And living in a neighborhood like that is very different than living in a whole lot of other places. Like the way that you like live in space is different. And like, do you understand that, right? Like that is a proximity question to me. The authenticity thing, I just want to challenge it in public for people, because I've just seen people use it as like a weapon. And I like don't think that is like the spirit of the work, right? And I say that as somebody who like, I can say that both my parents are drug addicts and da-da-da. And I don't proactively offer those things because I don't want people to be like, oh, you know, he really gets it. Just like, that's just not fair to the work. And I can say, you know, like my father's been clean I'm 30, he's been clean for 27 years. So I grew up in recovery and understand that, and like that's important to me. But off the bat, unless you didn't know that, that doesn't necessarily grant me access. And I worry that we can sometimes like weaponize our experience in ways that actually don't stand in concert with the people we say we do, and that's not fair. And I think that can sometimes be destructive. But the question of experience and how close are you willing to stand for people that have not experienced it themselves, I think is like a real and honest thing that is also really hard to talk about.
Amazing. And so we're going to start getting to the question and answer portion of this session. And so I want you to start thinking about your questions. I'm going to ask one more, but then I'm going to open the floor, because I think it's important for you to have a conversation with these warriors. You have to have that conversation. But, you know, the question that I have to ask, and this is a question that comes in part because 3 of you are actually running for either city council or mayor. And this is even a question for you, Millie, because, you know, yeah, I know, but you know, but it's a question because I do think it's an important question to ask about, and I call it the position or power question. It's one that was brought up about 3 years ago by Frederick Haynes, who was a pastor in Dallas at the Congressional Black Caucus. And he made a huge point. That is that Fannie Lou Hamer had no position, but she had a lot of power. The converse is that you can gain position. You can gain position in systems and yet find yourself effectively powerless. For everyone on this panel, the question has to be asked, you know, how do you think you're going to be able to balance that? That idea that, okay, you get into a position, but you get elected, you get on a board, but now you have to deal with the relationships and that are part of that. Because after all, these systems exist. They exist to outlast people. And they're built upon relationships that last long after people have died. So I have to ask that question. So let's start with Jonathan, since you're running for Fullerton City Council. Am I right about that?
Yes. Right. Can you rephrase that a little bit more?
Well, how do you balance that position and power? That is, when you're an activist and organizing, you have a power. You have power, you have your individual power, you have collective power, and you're able to galvanize and mobilize folks. And then you get the position. Well, the position becomes a problem of, are you actually going to continue to be authentic? I hate that word, authentic. Being true to the people that you're serving, the people that the reason why you're, in some ways, why you are in that position in the first place.
Yeah, so it's interesting that we're having this conversation about authenticity, because when I think about authenticity, it's why are you doing this is really just the question. And, organizing in of itself is not authentic. There are a lot of people doing organizing and it's inauthentic. There's a lot of people organizing parents in Los Angeles for their political motives. There's a lot of people organizing in Los Angeles, because they think it looks good, because, and then in the end, the parents are not leaders in their communities and they're just, organized for this public event. They're not given recognized that it's just inauthentic of itself because they're not doing it for the right reasons. I'm not saying I have the right reasons. I'm not saying any of us four have the right reasons. But I think that's the question that I think, DeRay's really asking is like, why are you doing this? Why do you really want to organize? So when I'm thinking about, the positions of power that, or of influence that we're seeking, it's about, really thinking to kind of stretch that conversation, what world do we want? And, balancing the world between, the world as it should be and the world that it is, and the tension that we live between those two worlds. Because, we have to recognize that there is a balance of power between communities, and we have to admit that right now there isn't a balance of power. That there is a private sector, there's a public sector, and there's a civic sector that is in imbalance. There's way too much money involved. There's way too many politicians that are inauthentic because they're not doing the right things. Then there's communities that are not recognizing their own power, and there's a lot of organizers that are not doing it in a very authentic way. So to answer that question, I think there are some of us here that want to be in positions to make sure that we are advocating on behalf of communities, that we're coming into the mindset that we are organizers. And then Zeke and I just had a conversation that we're coming into this and we are running because we are organizers, and we won't stop thinking that way.
Okay, DeRay, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think for me, I think about the framing as like, what are your commitments and will you keep them regardless of where you stand in the work? So I think about my commitments, it's a commitment to tell the truth always or never, right? Like this, that the truth, telling the truth in public has been so central to the way that I've lived my life for the past 2 years at the very least. And like, I don't know how I can move in different spaces and not keep that commitment. The second is this idea of like, people deserve a plan. One of the, this is the third day since I announced, and the number of like think pieces and stuff written about it. I made like, this is probably one of my first public appearances since the announcement. I made I've done very little press, but the number of think pieces is really interesting. And people call, the reporters call, and they're like, DeRay, da-da-da. And I'm like, the plan's gonna come out next week. We hope that the plan's coming out next week, like the platform, all this stuff. But people are just so used to like getting the soundbite and being okay with it. Like if I told them, I could say, what have I told, this idea that the traditional pathways to politics and the politicians who follow them will not lead us to transformational change. I believe that. It's in the Medium piece I wrote. I've said it 10,000 times at this point. And people, like reporters, take that and they're like, oh yeah. And I'm like, what? But what about the plan? Like you deserve a plan, right? It's like not fair to people's lives that is like okay, right? That is like the way that we live in the world, and you should like. So I'm telling everybody, you better call me back when this plan come out. Like we having a 40-minute conversation where I'm literally rehashing what I just said in the Medium piece, but that's fine because I know you need a new quote. But like, you better call me back and hold me to the fire with the plan, right? And if the plan's not good, then we should be able to talk about that. And I can say, and the plan is not done, so this is one of the big bets, right? But it is this thing about like, I believe that. Like, I think that's fair to people's lives, that like, you deserve a plan. You don't deserve a list. You don't deserve a couple bullets. Like, you deserve a plan, like a what and a how. You deserve that. And like, if I can't deliver that, then you should rake me over the coals, and I can tell you that up front. And it's not fair to people that you like will accept this soundbite from me as a definitive, that like isn't fair. So that's like a commitment that I have. There's also this thing about like engaging in options and feedback. So, it's important that we, like a commitment that I have is like that how do I say this in this way? Is that I believe in conversation, which is hard sometimes because, I think about myself as somebody who people feel strongly about either way. So either people think I'm like Satan or the second coming of Christ. And that is really interesting. So it is hard sometimes to keep the commitment when people say really, people will say things in the press about me, and then they'll call and be like, DeRay, we should have lunch. And I'm like, I just read the thing you wrote in BuzzFeed. Like you literally just said like DeRay is, insert here, worst adjective you can ever imagine. And then they'll call and, it's a commitment that I have to talk to people, so I answer the phone. And it's not always easy to keep all of the commitments, but it is real, right? That like I can't say I believe in conversation and ignore your call. I can answer the phone and say, I can't believe you did that, right? That's the opening statement I got. But like I'll still answer the phone, or I'll still text you back, or I'll still give you my number, or I'll tell you to DM me because I believe that. And the last thing, and I think this is one of the hardest things, and this is what I learned when I was in both the public school systems, is this idea of like solutions at scale. I think about so much of the way people think about the world as like, my school, my classroom. And then it's like, well, what happens when the decision is 200 schools and 10,000 classrooms, right? Like it changes. And I think that we have not done, I think not necessarily we, I think the government has not done a good job of helping people understand the scale question. So I think about when I was a senior director in human capital in Minneapolis, or the special assistant in Baltimore, is that we'd find these like amazing pockets of innovation, and people are like, why aren't y'all doing that everywhere? It's like, because we have to figure out how to do that for an employee population of 12,000 people. It's like it's different. And we believe that like the solutions should touch everybody. And this question about like how can we lessen the constraints to allow space for innovation is like a real thing. But the commitment is like, how do we create solutions at scale? That what it means to win is not that 2 people succeed, but that everybody does. This thing about, when I talk about Baltimore, it's like more and more people work and live there, but everyone thrives, right? And the everyone thrives piece is a scale question. And I think it's easy to be seduced by the non-scale solution. They're like, oh, we're gonna fix this little thing over here, as opposed to thinking about like, how do we make people's lives writ large better?
Millie, what do you think?
So I think any answer I have to this question is a little bit easier for me to put out there because I'm not running. I'm not going to be in a position. I'm going to retain my power as an organizer, as you were saying. But I think when I think about this question in the context of myself personally, my leadership at RISE, my capacity as a TFA core member, and like the many parts of my identity, I think for us in our work, we're constantly analyzing what is our social capital in any given situation. So as an educated woman of color, I have social capital in certain situations that I can use to lift up the voices of other people. And then there are situations in which I don't have social capital. And I need people to use their social capital to support my voice to be taken seriously or to be lifted up. I think when I think about an organization like Teach for America, obviously the core is diversifying a lot, but the reality is the majority of our organization does not look like the communities that we serve. And I think for me, working to like constantly analyze my social capital and recognize that it is different in different situations is the way that I work to help my allies see that like that's something that we as allies should be doing for the different movements that we want to support and be part of. To create the change that we want to see is like consistently analyzing our social capital to say like what is our power in this one situation, in this one scenario, and like how can we use it, and when do we need to ask other people to leverage their power for us. Again, that's a lot easier for me to do and actually act on because I won't be serving an elected office. But I guess that's kind of my roundabout answer to that question.
Yeah, I mean, but it also applies even within institutions. I mean, long-standing institutions are, you may get a position, and those institutions exist for the same reason governments exist, to outlast people. So it's a good answer to have. What do you think, Zeke?
Yeah. So when I decided to run for city council, oddly enough, the New York Times did not come to do a front page story on my run. I was lucky to get an interview in the Fells Point Bugle. No, it's a really important question, and one that I think all of us in this room should constantly ask of ourselves and challenge ourselves. And just the way Millie was talking about, in each situation, you have a different amount of power. The district that I'm running in, it's Southeast Baltimore. And it's a really interesting area. It's diverse, but it's also where a lot of the development and the sort of moneyed interests have poured into over the last couple of years. So you've got part of the Inner Harbor, this area Harbor East. And frankly, it comprises of primarily white Baltimore in a city that is primarily black. So the interesting thing for the first district was, even though Baltimore swings like 10-1 Democrat to Republican, the constituents in the first district actually voted for Larry Hogan, our Republican governor, in the last gubernatorial race. And when I would knock doors, when I've been knocking doors in the first district, and my, sort of like DeRay said, part of my thing is really about listening and engaging with people that I don't necessarily agree with. And what I would hear a lot from folks is these two ideas. One is that I want more parking. Two is that I want you to kill the Red Line, which was this east-west $3 billion rail project that would have connected these disparate parts of Baltimore, would have connected black and white Baltimore, would have provided access to jobs, would have opened up our city and our economy in a very real way. And when we think about all these issues with education and all the rest, I've learned that transit and people's ability to get to work and to get to school is actually really central to that question, right? So people would say to me, I want more parking, and I don't want the Red Line. And in some ways, those two thoughts are sort of disconnected, right? If you want more parking, then you want more people taking public transit. You want to open the city up. And unfortunately, behind that idea of I don't want the Red Line is I don't want people from West Baltimore coming into my neighborhood. That's not everybody, but that's some folks, right? And so part of the job for me is to convince people that it is in our mutual self-interest to open ourselves up, to become a less segregated city, because Baltimore was a pioneer in segregation and redlining and blockbusting and all these mechanisms that were used to keep our communities separate. And the result has been 344 murders last year. The result is a broken transit system, a broken police department, a broken school system, institutions that are fundamentally broken. And so the idea behind my campaign is that we're all served by having a more open, honest community. And that's not necessarily popular with everyone. And so the quick story I'll tell before I get off the mic, one of the things we decided to do, so like I said, the district is very diverse. You've got growing Hispanic population, you've got a lot of white folks, less black folks, but there's this one area in our city, in our district, that is very poor. You've got kind of working white, working class poor neighborhoods, and then you've got a housing project, all black, and suffers from the same ills as anywhere else in West Baltimore, lead paint, no access to transit, no jobs, all the rest, right? One of the things that goes on in O'Donnell Heights is that people don't vote, right? And so one of the things I said with the campaign is, look, this can't just be about representing our affluent areas in the district. We have to also talk and engage with people living in O'Donnell Heights and Graceland Park and Broning Manor, some of the tougher areas in the first district. And my campaign advisor was like, don't do that. Don't bother. Folks don't vote, they're not gonna vote for you, right? Voting is one of these very predictive things. We know that when people vote frequently, they vote all the time, and so you literally, when you decide to do this, you get a big list of what's called super voters, and it's everybody that votes consistently, and that's the people you're supposed to talk to. Don't worry about anybody else. Right? And so it's one of these contradictory things where if you believe that democracy is about bringing more voices into the conversation, how do you just talk to the people that are already in the conversation? And so my pushback was, look, this is about, fundamentally, if I don't go do voter registration in O'Donnell Heights, then I don't deserve to be councilman for the first district of Baltimore City. And so we did. And we went in there and we had this very frank conversation. These 5 women sat around in a circle. They're sort of the big machers, that's a Yiddish word. They're the big machers. They're like the women that if you want to do something in O'Donnell Heights, you need to talk to them first, right? And one of the things they said, Ms. Broadway said to me was, look, there's a reason why no one in here votes, right? Because I was asking them, you know, how can we get more people involved? How can we get more people in this process? She said there's a reason why people here don't vote, and it's because every 4 or 5 years, someone who looks like you comes into our community, makes a bunch of promises, tells us stuff that sounds appealing, and then we don't see them ever again until 4 years later, right? And one of the things in this project was, in the housing project, was that they cut the project into 2 parts. They're going to do a redevelopment. They're going to try and create mixed income housing. But part of the deal with this redevelopment was that O'Donnell Heights was supposed to get a public park. There's no green space over there, right? And I'd sat in on a community meeting 3 weeks ago, before this registration drive, where the housing department came out to O'Donnell Heights and said, look, we know we promised you guys a park, but bad news. City ran out of money. You know, we can't do it, not this time. Maybe next cycle, you know, the city will get some more money, but that park we promised, it's off the table. And that is the civic death cycle that we're in, is that people make commitments, people make promises, and they don't live up to them. And as a result, people don't vote. They don't participate because they don't see their vote as mattering. Who cares if I elect Zeke or DeRay or any of these folks, because it's going to be the same broken promises again and again and again. And so part of the responsibility that I now have is to be accountable to those 5 women and all the other folks in O'Donnell Heights, and not just represent the wealthier neighborhoods that I know will come out, but also the parts of the district and the parts of the city whose voices don't get heard.
Yeah, I think that deserves a round of applause right there. Now, folks, it's time for you. The floor is open. Come up and ask some questions. The key word is questions. No commentary. If it's commentary, I'm going to go and step out and directly tell you, what's the question? So let's start with over on this left side.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Leah Owens. I'm Newark 2004. And just real quick, because you always have to preface your question. But I am an alum who is re-engaging with TFA after being separated for several years. I found that as my activism and organizing was developing in Newark, some of my work was threatening to the organization, and the community members I was working with were highly concerned about the privatization of public education. So we see a lot of TFA being a part of that destruction of our traditional school district with the displacement of veteran teachers. We are under state control, so we have TFA appointees carrying out this agenda in the district. So with these comments about leaders not being ready for an enlightened community and authenticity, my question to the panelists is, how closely does your work align with the mission and practices of TFA? And like, how do you fight your fight knowing that in some ways TFA perpetuates inequity?
Perpetuates what?
Well, I'm going to, since I'm known for telling people, so let's start with, okay.
I can go
John,
first.
you okay, DeRay, you can do
So it is. So I get the TFA question personally a lot. You know, when I spoke at UPenn maybe, and the teachers union there wrote an open letter to me, essentially saying I didn't believe in kids because of my relationship with Teach for America. When I think about, there are a couple things when I think about Teach for America. One is I understand like imperfect organizations, right, and like that is real. The second is like heavily influenced by my work in school systems. So when I think about like, what does it mean to hire 800 teachers a year where there's a 10% turnover, is that Teacher America is one of the only national recruiters of teachers, right? So like at that level, it was like, I need to make sure kids have like a teacher and a good teacher. And at scale, again, it was a scale question for me. It's like 800 teachers is that's a lot of teachers. And in Minneapolis, we hired 400, which is huge. And the core of Minneapolis is like, I mean, it was 3 when I got there. It was like 10 when I left, so that it's really small. So that sort of changes the way I think about it. I also think that districts need to, and I saw it in Baltimore, I saw it in Minneapolis, districts can push Teacher America to like serve in the interest of the district a little bit more. I think that people have this idea that like Teacher America comes in and like tells the district what to do, and that happens if the district lets it sometimes. I've been in 2 places where the district, that wasn't the relationship with Teacher America. So that like, I get that. I do understand sort of the larger critique about privatization, and I think that that's really regional. So I think about in Baltimore, every teacher's a member of the union, like everybody, everybody's a union paying person, and the school leaders get to choose the teachers. Like the district, we don't, I don't know if it's changed since the new superintendent, but we didn't force place teachers, like the principals got to choose. So I think that works. I think that there's, I think if anything that I've seen be challenging, I think it is sometimes the intensity of Teacher America Corps members coming into districts sometimes with this sort of like, I think I can change the world on day one, sort of, just got into the building, don't have a key to the classroom, and they're like, I got it. And you're like, where's the bathroom? So I think that rubs people a little differently, but I'm mindful, again, as somebody who's like had to hire 800 teachers, that like there's this myth that like we have figured out teacher training, and we haven't. So I know what it's like to recruit from universities and colleges and see people who have gone to school for 30 years, and I'm getting the call like, DeRay, what happened? And I'm like, you hired them, I didn't hire them. So, like I think that there's like I want to tease that out a little bit better about like the myths that I think support the idea that Teacher America is like the devil in places, while also understanding that like it is an imperfect organization, and part of what I think my work as an alum is to like push it to be better. And also, I think that if people want it to go away or whatever, they should make another national recruiter of teachers. Like, I think at a basic level, as somebody who had to do this work in school systems, like the recruiting aspect is hiring that many teachers is hard to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very fair challenge. I think Teach for America, like every institution, and like all of us in this room, is imperfect. Is a project that is worthy of critique, and honest critique. When I came in to Baltimore in 2008 to Teach for America, one of the challenges that I saw was that there was almost no conversation about racism and white supremacy, right? Like it was like weirdly missing from the conversation. You have one of the most segregated cities in America, a city built on segregation, and we're talking about achievement gaps and data and this, that, and the other thing, but no one is saying the fundamental problem here is that this is a segregated city where the outcomes for black and white people are dramatically different, right? And there was like and when anyone would kind of like raise that, it would be, let's get back to the data question, right? Which is really problematic, because it becomes this like self-fulfilling, weird, kind of like bizarre conversation that people are having without acknowledging what's really going on in our cities. And so a lot of the work for me, for a bunch of my friends at the time, was to really push on that and like raise the uncomfortable question about like race and racism need to be central to this conversation. We can't talk about the achievement gap as if it happened in this weird vacuum where black people just all of a sudden, or poor people just all of a sudden aren't learning as good as white people or rich people are. Like that didn't just happen. That happened because folks in power segregated our city, created differential schools, created differential communities, right? Like there's a real history that we need to grapple with, we need to be honest with, we need to read. We need to read books like Not in My Neighborhood, which is about housing policy in Baltimore and sort of how it was created and designed. We need to not just come in with our own ideas, but listen. that we need to be honest and humble and try to understand this thing in a real way. But I think what I've seen, at least in the last couple years, is there has been progression, there has been some reflection, there has been, at least in Baltimore, I see people talking about race, I see people talking about class and gender and identity in a way that puts it at the forefront of the conversation. And so I think all these things are imperfect, and part of the work is to ask the hard questions.
Yeah.
And to push people to respond, and to push people that are sitting on panels and doing the work in the positions to really grapple with that. I think what you said is real.
Yeah, and we have another question. Right, yeah, you can come up, well.
Hi, my name is Genesis, and this is my friend Julian. We're both organizers at our university, and we're joining the 2016 core. And we.
Congratulations.
They gave me the wrong lanyard for some reason. I don't know why.
So we're both organizers at our campus, and we've done, all that good stuff, sit-ins and release demands, all this good stuff that we're doing at our university. However, we feel a lot of pushback from the administration and older generations at our university, and they kind of they degrade our movement by saying things like, oh, they're young, they don't know what they're talking about. We've lived longer, we have all this experience, and how do we just want to know in what ways, as organizers, we can uplift and raise the voices of young people at our university and at our community in general.
Let's see, Jonathan.
I mean, when I'm thinking of people, criticizing young people and criticizing organizers, I'm just thinking of like systems of oppression. Like, of course they're going to say that. Like, of course they're going to say, students should be protesting, organizers shouldn't be organizing. Like, of course they're going to say that, right? But that's the tough work that we're doing as organizers, as you guys, as everyone in this room, as us on the panel. Like, I want to, ask that you continue doing this. And if you really want to keep, empowering, the students, is that like we're all in this together. Just keep thinking about the issues that are at play. Keep trying to get energized, and don't try to let an administration back you down.
And the only thing I'll add is that this work will always be more important than it is popular. And if like the work, if you want it to be, not you, but if organizers want it to be popular, then it's going to be a non-starter. I think about the people that call me now who would not return a single phone call when I got tear gas in August 2014, right? In September 2014, people didn't know who I was, like, people I like know and love wouldn't do anything. And now they like, DeRay, can you come talk in my, and I'm like, oh no, I got that email, from way back when you, chose differently. So like just, it's about, I think it is about keeping to your commitment. I think about us, we made a commitment to like fight today and return tomorrow. And we made those commitments every day, and we continue to make them, and we got traction, right? But like people told us to go home, all this, like I met with the CBC and they were like, DeRay, but we couldn't come down there. They told us not to come. And I'm like, they told me to go home and I came, so, and don't let people off the hook. And, I go to rooms now, people are like, oh, we really support you. And I'm like, don't support me in silence. Don't call me, like, support me publicly, right? No more secret conversations about how great the protests are. Say it out loud. And I think you guys can push people to do that.
Yeah. And one last question.
Hey, I'm Gary. Thanks for being here. I think it's really important that we continue to tell the truth. So I appreciate sort of like pushing that. A lot of people don't really like politicians, right? And so I didn't realize there were going to be 3 of you running for office. And so it was a little surprising. And so I guess my question is, I'd love to hear from all 4 of you about sort of like, how do you sort of keep telling the truth as you sort of move in spaces where that can be really hard to do because of the relationships of power?
Yeah, and I would say it's not just in politics, but also, working with organizations. And so,
Yeah.
Millie, what's your perspective about doing that?
I think the question you asked is a great one, because in organizing, what we're constantly doing is assessing relationships, assessing our power in those relationships, and leveraging that to make things move. and happen. I think, you know, that's why organizing is so important. To me, like organizing is not an add-on, it's not optional, it's not a last resort, it's not like let's try this after we've tried everything else. It is how movements happen. And so the more that we're able to actually do that and assess, like, you know, build relationships, assess those relationships, leverage power, the more change we're able to make. But I think to your point, and you know, it's something that I think we all deal with personally, regardless of what our public role is, it is tiring. Like, it is exhausting to feel like you're constantly on duty to call somebody out and say, why did you say that? Don't say that about this community. Don't, you know, like, that is exhausting work. And dealing with, is that my duty? Is that not my duty? That's a personal question that each of us has to answer. And in what capacity we act on that depends completely on each of us. I think one, like, give yourself room for self-care. It's okay if you can't always step up. In order for like us to have sustainability in our work, we have to make sure that we're aware of when are we going to put ourselves in a situation where we know that's going to be the case and we know things like that are going to happen. And two, I think like it is hard. Like, it's absolutely hard. Like, I get red in the face. I get really uncomfortable every time I'm about to do it, even if I'm just going to ask a question. But at the same time, I have to think about, like, in my role, if I'm encouraging families to put themselves on the line for their kids, what am I willing to do? And so it is difficult because it's a personal question that we have to answer in the public sphere. But it's all about assessing relationships and figuring out what makes the most sense.
Well, hey, that's it for the moment. Let's give these warriors a round of applause.